March of 1944. The skies over Europe were a patchwork of smoke and fire, a vast chessboard of metal birds, each one carrying pilots who knew every second could be their last. The air was alive with the roar of engines, the whine of propellers, and the crackle of distant anti-aircraft fire. Among the countless planes fighting for dominance in the skies, one fighter was quietly transforming into something no German pilot would ever forget. That fighter was the P-51 Mustang, a sleek, beautiful machine that had already earned a reputation for range and maneuverability. But what it was about to achieve, how fast it could go, was something even its engineers had not fully anticipated. In a crowded hangar somewhere deep in England, the air smelled of oil, fuel, and the faint tang of metal. Mechanics and technicians were everywhere, heads bent over engines, tools clanging against steel, the soft hiss of compressed air punctuating the tension of preparation. Among them was a man named Harold Hal Turner, a relatively young, unassuming technician who had a reputation for tinkering. He wasn't a pilot, and he certainly wasn't one of the celebrated engineers whose names would be etched into history. To his colleagues, some of his ideas seemed odd, even a little stupid. But Turner had a gift, a sense for machines that bordered on instinct. He could listen to a plane, feel its heartbeat through its vibrations, and sense what it needed to perform at its very best. At this moment, the Mustang he was working on sat quietly in the hangar, its polished aluminium gleaming under the dim light. Its V12 Merlin engine, one of the marvels of engineering at the time, hummed quietly as Turner ran his hands along the propeller. Most pilots and engineers had been focused on the Mustang's engine upgrades, the aerodynamics of its fuselage, or the standard adjustments to maximize climb rate. But Turner's eyes were fixed on something most would dismiss, a small, nearly imperceptible detail: the angle of the propeller blades. The propellers on a plane aren't just metal spinning in the air, they're the heart of speed and lift, translating raw engine power into forward motion. Every angle, every adjustment, affects airflow, efficiency, and ultimately, performance. Turner had been experimenting quietly, making tiny changes in his off hours, noting how slight tweaks affected RPMs and torque. Most of his colleagues had no idea what he was doing. To them, it looked like harmless fiddling, maybe even an indulgent hobby. But Turner's obsession wasn't aimless. He believed that by changing the pitch of the propeller slightly, the Mustang could slice through the air more cleanly, reduce drag, and unlock a speed the engineers hadn't imagined. He faced resistance, of course. "Don't mess with the factory settings," his supervisors warned. "These planes are tested. We can't risk anything stupid." But Turner persisted. He had a quiet confidence that came not from arrogance, but from a deep understanding of machinery. He adjusted the pitch by just a fraction of a degree, tightening, loosening, recalibrating. It was meticulous, almost surgical work, done under the low hum of the hangar lights and the occasional shout of a nearby mechanic. Meanwhile, outside, the war raged on. Bomber formations climbed into the sky, escorted by fighters, their silver bellies reflecting the sun as they headed toward targets in Germany. Every Mustang counted. Every extra mile per hour could mean life or death for the pilot inside. Turner knew it. He wasn't just chasing numbers, he was chasing survival. The kind of speed that could allow a Mustang to outrun enemy fighters, avoid flak bursts, and make it back to base. On the day of the test flight, Turner's modification would be scrutinized by pilots and engineers alike. The Mustang rolled out of the hangar, engine growling, propellers spinning with a precision that seemed almost too perfect. The pilot, a veteran named Lieutenant James Carver, eyed the plane skeptically. "You really think this will do anything?" he asked, voice tinged with skepticism and curiosity. Turner only smiled faintly, his hands greasy, his heart quietly pounding. "Just fly it," he said. "You'll see." As Carver taxied down the runway, the propellers slicing the air, Turner felt a mix of excitement and fear. This wasn't just another test. If he was wrong, the plane might underperform, even risk crashing. But if he was right, if the calculations, instincts, and hours of silent adjustment paid off, it could change everything about how Mustangs were flown, how fast they could go, and how the Allies fought in the skies over Europe. The Mustang lifted off, the roar of its Merlin engine echoing across the airfield. Carver pushed the throttle forward, and the plane surged ahead with a smoothness that made the hairs on Turner's arms stand on end. As the Mustang climbed, it began to accelerate faster than expected, cutting through the clouds with a grace that belied its size. Turner watched, breath held, as the airspeed indicator climbed, faster and faster, past numbers that had seemed like limits just hours before. And at that moment, high above the English countryside, the Mustang was no longer just a fighter plane. It was something extraordinary, a testament to the vision of a quiet technician who had dared to challenge convention. What seemed stupid on the ground would soon prove to be genius in the skies, setting the stage for a story that would surprise pilots and engineers alike, a story that would be told in hangars, briefing rooms, and across the combat theaters of World War II. The question now wasn't just whether the plane could fly faster, the question was how fast, and how many German pilots would live to see it coming. As the Mustang roared through the clouds, Lieutenant Carver could feel something different. It wasn't just the engine, it was the way the plane seemed to cut the air like a knife, gliding with a precision and speed that made his pulse quicken. At first, he thought it was just the adrenaline of being airborne, but the instruments told a different story. The airspeed indicator climbed past previously safe limits, numbers that had been considered the peak of the Mustang's capabilities. Carver tightened his grip on the controls, a mix of exhilaration and disbelief flooding through him. He had flown hundreds of hours in these planes, seen every maneuver they could handle, but this was something entirely new. Back on the ground, Turner's heart raced as he watched the plane disappear into the clouds. He knew pilots often had a love-hate relationship with mechanical surprises. Too little adjustment, and they blamed the machine. Too much, and the plane could bite back. But this was different. He had calculated every angle, every twist of the propeller blades, every adjustment to the pitch. And now, it was proving that even the tiniest change, the seemingly stupid idea he had quietly tinkered with, could make an impossible difference. The test flight lasted only a few minutes, but those minutes would be etched into the history of aviation. Carver returned to the airfield with the Mustang still humming, its frame vibrating gently, as if satisfied with its performance. Mechanics rushed forward, eyes wide, noting the speed, the climb rate, the engine readings. Everyone was astonished. Reports later described the Mustang reaching speeds several miles per hour faster than anything previously recorded, a figure that could mean the difference between life and death in the dogfights over Europe. Word spread quickly. Engineers, pilots, and officers crowded around Turner, eager for an explanation. Many of them had dismissed his stupid adjustments, assuming they couldn't possibly impact the aircraft's performance so dramatically. Turner simply shrugged, brushing his hands on a rag, trying to appear casual even though a thrill ran through him. "Just a tweak," he said quietly. But those two words couldn't capture the significance of what he had done. That small change in propeller pitch was now responsible for giving the Mustang a critical edge over enemy fighters. The implications were immediate and profound. In the skies over Germany, P-51 pilots began reporting encounters where their planes could suddenly outrun the feared Focke-Wulf 190 seconds, and even the Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds in certain conditions. They found themselves able to climb faster, dive more cleanly, and execute evasive maneuvers with a confidence that had previously been out of reach. German pilots, accustomed to the Mustang's speed being impressive but manageable, suddenly faced a machine that seemed to defy expectations, a plane that could suddenly appear, strike, and vanish before counterattack. What was fascinating to engineers was not just the raw speed, but how it affected combat dynamics. Dogfights were about reaction time, positioning, and the ability to make split-second decisions. By changing the propeller angle, Turner had inadvertently altered the Mustang's thrust-to-drag ratio, giving pilots a subtle but game-changing advantage. They could maintain higher speeds at altitude without over-revving the engine, giving them endurance in prolonged engagements. In many ways, Turner's adjustment turned a perfectly good fighter into a weapon that exceeded its design envelope. Reports from the front lines soon trickled back. Pilots described moments where enemy fighters simply couldn't keep up. One American pilot recounted chasing a Focke-Wulf across the sky, only to realize the German pilot was struggling to maintain speed. The Mustang didn't just catch up, it outpaced the enemy, turning what had been a dangerous chase into a decisive advantage. Others noted that fuel efficiency improved slightly at certain speeds because the engine wasn't laboring as hard against drag, a side effect no one had anticipated, but one that could extend range and operational effectiveness. In the hangars and testing fields back in England, debates erupted over Turner's approach. Some called it reckless, insisting no single technician should challenge the factory specifications. Others marveled at his instinctive understanding of aerodynamics and propeller mechanics, realizing that sometimes brilliance comes from the least likely sources. Turner himself didn't seek accolades. He was fascinated, almost scientifically, by watching the data pour in, noting minor adjustments, and imagining the plane performing under combat stress. To him, this wasn't fame, it was discovery, a personal triumph over the invisible barriers that constrained machines. By late spring, the Mustang's performance with Turner's adjustment was quietly incorporated into other aircraft. Pilots trained on the modified planes, gaining confidence in their enhanced abilities, and engineers studied the results, trying to understand why such a simple propeller tweak could yield such dramatic improvements. Manuals were updated, recommendations were made, and the Mustang quietly became one of the most feared and respected fighters in the European theater. And yet, despite the growing recognition, Turner remained in the shadows. He didn't seek headlines, medals, or the limelight. For him, the story was in the flight, in the numbers, in the way the plane responded when the propeller angle was just right. He knew that history would remember the pilots, the battles, and the machines, but the quiet victories of technicians like him often went unnoticed. And that was perfectly fine. The Mustang, faster than anyone expected, would speak for itself in the skies. The thing that astonished everyone wasn't just the speed. It was the realization that innovation doesn't always come from grand ideas, complex blueprints, or top-level engineers. Sometimes it comes from someone willing to question the obvious, to trust their instincts, and to make a change that everyone else called stupid. And in this case, that stupid change didn't just improve a plane, it altered the dynamics of aerial combat in ways that would ripple across the war. By the summer of 1944, the Mustang, now quietly upgraded with Turner's propeller adjustment, was everywhere in the skies over Europe. Pilots who had once regarded the P-51 as a solid but conventional fighter were discovering a startling truth. This plane could do things no one had thought possible. And for the Luftwaffe, it was a nightmare. Reports from German pilots spoke of Mustangs that seemed to appear out of nowhere, streaking past their formations at speeds they had never believed the aircraft capable of. Chasing them was like chasing shadows, fleeting and elusive, the roar of the Merlin engine echoing in disbelief. Lieutenant Carver, now flying missions deep over enemy territory, felt the difference in every engagement. One afternoon over northern France, he found himself in a tense dogfight with two Fokker-Wulfs. Normally, he would have been at a disadvantage, forced into defensive spirals, relying on evasive tactics and luck. But today, he pushed the Mustang forward, letting the propellers slice the sky at the precise angle Turner had set. The speed gain was subtle yet undeniable, just enough to outpace one enemy, then the other. Carver's Mustang climbed, dived, and surged with a fluidity that felt almost alive. The German pilots blinked, tried to keep up, and failed. One by one, they were forced to break off, leaving Carver stunned but triumphant. Stories like this multiplied. A Mustang pilot in Belgium reported running a head-on encounter with a Me-109. Both planes accelerated toward each other at terrifying speed, and in a moment that would have been deadly months before, the Mustang just outpaced the fighter, slipping past and diving away cleanly. Another pilot described chasing a Ju-88 bomber, its gunners confident until the Mustang drew closer than they expected. Then, suddenly, it was gone, out of range before anyone could react. It wasn't just speed, it was unpredictability. A new kind of advantage that Turner's simple adjustment had unlocked. Back at the bases, engineers analyzed flight logs and performance charts, still grappling with what had happened. They saw the numbers, the climb rates, the speed at various altitudes, and realized that the Mustang's capabilities had been quietly redefined. One simple tweak to the propeller angle, almost dismissed as irrelevant, had given the Allied pilots a decisive edge in combat. It was the kind of improvement that didn't come from new engines, experimental materials, or fancy aerodynamics. It came from a technician's intuition, the kind of practical genius that often goes unrecognized. And yet, the story wasn't just about numbers. It was about survival, about the men in the cockpits who lived because the plane could reach a speed no enemy expected. Pilots who had faced certain death found themselves with split seconds to maneuver, to climb out of a dive, to reach safety when before there had been none. Turner's adjustment didn't just make the Mustang faster, it gave pilots hope, a new sense of control in the chaos of war. The war would continue to rage, of course, and countless stories of heroism and tragedy unfolded every day. But the Mustang, quietly enhanced by one technician's insight, became a symbol of ingenuity triumphing over convention. It proved that sometimes breakthroughs don't come from grand theories or brilliant generals. They come from someone willing to look at the ordinary, to question the established norms, and to take a chance on what others dismiss as foolish. Lieutenant Carver would go on to recount the day of that first test flight with reverence. He remembered the moment the Mustang lifted off, the way it seemed to surge effortlessly into the sky, the silent power of the Merlin engine amplified by the subtle, almost invisible change Turner had made. And he remembered how, in the chaos of dogfights, that speed difference saved lives his and countless others. It wasn't luck, it was precision, instinct, and a quiet genius working behind the scenes. Turner, meanwhile, returned to the hangars, unnoticed by most, quietly adjusting, repairing, and perfecting planes. He never sought medals, and few knew his name outside the engineering corps. Yet every pilot who felt the Mustang surge forward, every airman who outpaced a German fighter, carried a piece of his legacy in their hands. The plane's reputation spread, and by the time D-Day arrived, the Mustang was no longer just another fighter, it was a tool of strategic advantage, a whisper of technological ingenuity that altered the air war over Europe. In retrospect, the story is simple yet profound. One technician, willing to experiment, to challenge the expected, to tweak a single component others considered trivial, changed the trajectory of aerial combat. It reminds us that innovation isn't always born in laboratories or command rooms. Sometimes, it comes from the hands of someone who sees what others overlook, who trusts instinct over convention, and who understands that even the smallest change can have enormous consequences. The Mustang, with its new speed and agility, became legendary. It was faster than anyone anticipated, more lethal than many feared, and yet, it carried within it a story of quiet genius, of unseen hands shaping history. And as pilots took to the skies, climbing above clouds that stretched for miles, chasing and evading, surviving against impossible odds, they were flying more than a plane. They were flying the vision of a man who believed that no idea was too small, no adjustment too insignificant, and that sometimes, what looks like a stupid tweak can become the difference between life and death, between defeat and victory. The skies would remember the Mustang, and in the heart of every airman who had lived to see another day, they would remember the unseen genius behind it, Harold Turner, the man whose quiet courage and mechanical instinct turned a good fighter into an unstoppable force, and in doing so, changed the course of the war, one propeller angle at a time.